So for the third reading today, I've chosen a reading from Isaiah chapter 6. And it's a reading which is very easy to actually date precisely because we can cross-reference it with secular histories. So he says, in the year that King Uzziah died, and we know from secular histories this would have been 742 BCE. So it's a story of Isaiah, one of the greatest prophets of Israel, volunteering for incarnation and for mission. Here's how it goes. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling out one to another, Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds of the temple shook, and the temple itself was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. Words inspired by God. On October the 16th, 2011, I gave a homily in Palo Alto in our church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Palo Alto, on the state of our world at the time, 9 years ago. And I called it Digging Deep, How Our World Really Works. And the subtitle I gave to it was, Something is Rotten in the State of Denmark. And as a result of that homily, we created an 18-month-long seminar for COJ. And every month we took a different topic, and somebody gave a lecture on that particular topic. And then during the month that follows, we broke up into small groups, 5 or 10 people, and we began researching that topic at more depth and sharing it with each other. And that went on actually for about 18 months. We covered a whole bunch of different topics. In actual fact, Don Loomis, who's with us here today again, Don kept that process going for years and years and years, and still keeps it going, looking particularly at TED Talks that might inspire us. And we covered a whole bunch of areas. We looked at ancient archaeology and what it really tells us and how it's hidden often. We looked at agriculture and agribusiness, GMO crops and insecticides and chemtrails and stuff like that. We looked at ecology, the whole health of our planet. We looked at our educational model and whether or not it's actually preparing kids and even graduates for life and for love. We looked at our financial institutions. We looked at the justice system. We looked at the mass media. We looked at medicine and the pharmaceutical industry. We looked at the military-industrial complex. We looked at politics. We looked at materialistic science. We looked at spirituality. And then we sprinkled it with a few kind of fun topics like lucid dreams and extraterrestrials and crop circles. And that went on for 18 months. And I think we learned a lot and we educated each other about a lot of these things. But now, in the last month that I've been on staycation away, I've been thinking about this. And what I see is that 9 years down the line, we live in a world which is even more chaotic than it was in 2011. And so over the last week, I sat down and I began to try to put together what are the factors that we need in order to understand and transform our world. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. I looked at 10 different factors without which we cannot understand the present situation and without which we cannot transform the present situation. And so I'm going to just name these 10 factors, and then I go into each one in more detail. So you could say that basically you only have one main point today, as long as you know that there are going to be 10 subpoints to that one main point. So here are the 10 factors that I came up with. The first one has the realization that we are eternal beings. We were never born, and we will never die. Any effort to understand the world's situation without that realization is going to lead us immediately into fear. The second factor is, I believe that we volunteer to incarnate in different worlds and different dimensions because the soul is eternal. Thirdly, I believe that we volunteer to be on planet Earth, and we have incarnations on planet Earth, maybe hundreds of them, or maybe even thousands of them. The fourth factor is that we tend to reincarnate with the same soul pod or the same group from incarnation to incarnation. Number five, I believe, is that we can insert ourselves as we volunteer for incarnation, just like Isaiah did in this reading, or as Joan Chichester said, or as Kaji said in the first reading from Mark. We can insert ourselves into any period of history because there is no time on the other side. Number six, I really believe, and I've said this many, many, many times over the last few months, that all of us who are on planet Earth right now, all 7.5 billion of us on planet Earth right now, we volunteered to be here now. Number seven would be that we have a threefold objective, and I'll tease that asunder in a few minutes. We have three agendas when we volunteered this time. Number eight is that violence in our thoughts, in our words, or in our actions never, ever, ever serves the evolutionary trajectory. Number nine would be that there is darkness and there is evil. We all experience it. And it has several origins, and I want to tease asunder what those origins might be. And then the 10th factor is that this evil or this darkness has managed to hijack and to corrupt all big human institutions. So in order for us to understand the situations in which we find ourselves, we need to factor all of these pieces in. Otherwise, we're putting band-aids on something that needs radical surgery. So that's what I hope to accomplish in the homily this morning. So my first claim then is that, number one, is that we are eternal beings who are never born and will never die. Your life did not begin at conception, and it doesn't end when you breathe your last breath. Life begins only when God self-fractalizes and creates souls, and it only ends when the last soul is enlightened and merges back with Source. So we're eternal beings. And there's some extraordinary research being done on that. Teilhard de Chardin said very famously at one stage, he said, we are not human beings having occasional spiritual experiences. We are spirit beings having incarnational or human experiences. And now, really modern science, those scientists in many fields, whether it's psychology or physics or medicine, are beginning to realize that this indeed is true, that we are indeed eternal beings. So I'm going to just a quick run through some of the research. The research by people like Ray Moody on near-death experiences. And at this stage, it is reckoned that upwards of 5% of Americans have had near-death experiences. People who've been declared clinically dead, they've stopped breathing, the heart isn't working anymore, and the brain is flatlining, but have subsequently been resuscitated and have reported these extraordinary encounters and experiences on the other side of the veil. There's a phenomenon called shared death experiences, where people who are attending the dying, often nurses or doctors or family members, themselves are experiencing extraordinary vistas, extraordinary experiences, light and music and a transformation of consciousness in the presence of the person who's actually dying. There is studied deathbed visions, what the people who are dying report in the last weeks of life, those who are coming to welcome them or to prepare them for the crossing over through the veil. They're called deathbed visions. There's a phenomenon called terminal lucidity. And it's a situation in which people who are dying, sometimes in the last few days of life, or sometimes just in the last few hours of life, regain consciousness. People who have been in a coma, or Alzheimer's patients who haven't recognized anybody for several years and haven't had a kind of a significant conversation for years and years and years, suddenly in the last day or two or the last hours will perk up, recognize everybody in the room and have intimate relationships and conversations with them, and then die. It's called terminal lucidity. There's the phenomenon which is called after-death communication, where people have visitations from, either on their phones or on video cameras, where the dead seem to appear. So they seem to be able to use, electronic equipment much more easily than person-to-person physical contact, because it's less dense. They don't have to downgrade their vibration level as much. There are what are called life between lives experiences. People like Michael Newton, this great American clinical psychologist, who age regressed about 25,000 people. And that they reported that in between incarnations, there's this part he called the life between lives. When we're debriefed on the life which has ended, we go back to school, we educate ourselves, and we prepare for the incarnation which is to come. There's the reincarnation phenomenon itself, particularly people like Ian Stevenson, extraordinary scientist from the University of Virginia, who spent 50 years traveling all over the world, particularly in the East, in Lebanon, and among the Inuit people of Alaska, who report reincarnation experiences within the family system. There's the work of people like Stanislav Grof, who wrote a very famous book called Basic Perinatal Matrices, where he's able to correlate what happens at various stages of the birthing process. There are 4 stages to the birthing process. And when the baby experiences difficulties at any one of these 4 stages, it correlates subsequently with neurotic behavior, in the adult life. So understanding the process of birthing is hugely important for somebody coming through the veil from the other side. The whole notion of, psychic abilities, mediums, out-of-body experiences, where occasionally, and you do this every night when you dream, you're literally having an out-of-body experience, and you're crossing the veil in some kinds of ways. So when I make the claim that we're eternal beings who are never born and never die, this is not just a kind of a spiritual fantasy. This is borne out now with a lot of real great research right now. So that's the first factor. Without that factor, we can't understand what's happening to us. Or more importantly, we can't understand how we can transform the situation and the world in which we find ourselves. So that would be the first factor. The second factor, I believe, is that as souls who are disincarnate entities, fractals, holographic fractals of God, we can volunteer to incarnate in all different kinds of dimensions and all different kinds of physical worlds. We're not just confined to an incarnation on planet Earth. And the reason that we incarnate in any of these places, I believe, is in order to generate experiences for God. And I've said this to you many times, that when you think about what we say of God, let's say within the Christian system, we talk about a trinity of persons, a Father, a Son, and a Spirit. But the Father simply represents isness or being. The Son represents God's total self-knowledge. And the Spirit represents the love that God has for whom she knows herself to be. Hinduism will put that very beautifully. They will say Sat, Chit, Ananda, being, knowledge, and bliss. So it's the very same idea, that if God is all there is, then God can't be omniscient, because there's nothing else to know except herself. And so in order to generate experiences, God has to self-fractalize holographically and send these souls out like bees leaving the hive and bringing back honey and stories to the queen. So all of us, all creatures in all dimensions and all realities, are simply the way in which the transcendent God becomes immanent and it generates experiences. That would be the second factor in order to understand our world right now. The third factor, I believe, is that on this one planet, those of us who've come to this planet, that we've incarnated hundreds, perhaps thousands of times in this planet until we've fully grokked what it means to be a human being. You can't understand what it means to be a human being if you had a single lifetime, in a single, belonging to a single race and a single caste and a single socioeconomic, grouping. You can't understand life just from that. You certainly can't understand life if you died as a 3-month-old baby from sudden infant death syndrome. what experience have you had of being a human? Zero, almost. And so we keep coming back again and again and again. And the research shows us that it seems that a typical reincarnation happens between 50 to 200 years in Earth time since the last incarnation. Now, on the other side, there isn't any time. So we're talking now about an artificial constraint that we call chronology, on our appearances on this planet. But it seems to be that somewhere between 50 years and 200 is the typical time in life between lives as judged by Earth time, except in situations of a really traumatic death, like death in war or a suicide. Then those souls tend to reincarnate much more quickly in Earth time. And also, an incarnation does not involve the full energy of a soul being committed to a particular incarnation. And so, again, Hinduism has this great notion of Atman and Jiva. Atman is that energy, that part of the energy of the soul, which never leaves the sight of God. And Jiva is that aspect that incarnates. And then they talk to each other. They download information. And this is why, as well, it's possible to have even parallel lives, parallel contemporaneous lifetimes, that you may be having 2 or 3 different physical incarnations on planet Earth at this stage in different cultures, in different bodies with a different gender, because you're only using part of your energy at any stage for an incarnational purpose. So that would be factor number 3 in understanding our times. Number 4, I believe, is that we tend to reincarnate as a soul pod. Almost like a Shakespearean troupe. So every year, let's say you're a member of a Shakespearean group, let's say in Palo Alto. And each year this group puts on a different drama, Hamlet or Macbeth or A Midsummer's Night Dream. From year to year, we put on different plays. But it's the same group of actors who play all these parts. And you're going to play totally different roles from year to year. You may change gender, caste, class, religious affiliation. You can change anything about yourself because all of these are simply artifacts of incarnation. So we tend to go with a group so that we can help each other to develop. And we choose, I believe, from 2 kinds of soul pods as we incarnate. We choose from the group that we feel a great kinship with and whom we spend our life between lives with. And then we choose as well from, I would call, the shadow pod. People who are going to be difficult for us in our lifetimes. So we bring into our lives what I would call weeders and fertilizers. The fertilizers are the people who love us unconditionally. But if we only had fertilizers in our lives, we'd all become narcissists. And so we choose weeders, people who take great glee and great gaudium in pointing out our inadequacies to us. But they're important to us because they stretch us as well. And as Susan Dowd mentioned many weeks ago, we get a chance to play all the roles. At one stage, you get to be the mother of the person who was your mother in this lifetime or in a previous lifetime. So understanding relationships is very important when you've played all the other roles as well. And I would claim then that the greatest prejudice is the greatest form of amnesia. Prejudice is the greatest form of amnesia. Because prejudice is predicated on the belief system, I only got one shot at it, here I am, I'm an Irish man with an Irish accent in a white body with a particular kind of background and family system, that's all I am. And now I'm prejudiced against some other group because of my amnesia. If I were to realize that I've been all those other people, I've been in all those different kinds of situations with all those kinds of classifications, I couldn't be prejudiced anymore. Because I'm just realizing I'm just getting another shot at life on planet Earth. So the single greatest cause of prejudice is amnesia for who we really are and how many times we've been in the other position. That will be factor number 4. Factor number 5, I believe, is the soul can choose to insert itself into any period of human history. Because time is an artifact of incarnation. It's simply a dramatic device that we build into incarnation. But at the other side of the veil, it is meaningless. So reincarnation does not necessarily have to take a chronological sequence. It doesn't mean that, I had a life in the 1300s, and the next time is going to be after that, maybe the 1500s or the 1700s. It is quite possible, I believe, that after this present incarnation, for me, Sean, you know, between 1946 and whenever, you know, I shuffle off this mortal coil, that my next incarnation, I could choose 500 BCE because I want to experience the Buddha or Confucius or Zoroaster or the prophet Ezekiel. And I could insert myself into that period. Or the whole soul pod could insert itself into that period. So it's not chronological. We simply choose the circumstances and the eras which best benefit our growth into love and compassion. That would be number 5. I look then at all of us on planet Earth right now. There are 7.5 billion of us on planet Earth right now. And I'm totally convinced that every single one of us volunteered to be here now. Every single one of us. But 99% of us are asleep at the wheel. We've forgotten completely who we are, you know, and why we've come. And so we've come as missionaries, or we come as Marines, whichever word you want to use in it, in order to move the whole system forward. And nobody is here by chance or by mistake. You're not here because a sperm met an egg. That's how you got here, but it is not why you are here. You are here because you entered into a detailed, what I've called preconception contract with a group of other souls to be on the planet right now to do particular work. Which brings me to point number 7, or factor number 7. What are our objectives for being here now? And I believe that there are 3 basic objectives. The first one, each of us came down in order to wake ourselves up to who we really are, to identify not with our physical bodies, not with our intellect, not with our emotions, not with our jobs, not with our relationships, but to identify with our soul self, the holographic fractal of God that is every one of us. Secondly, we came down here to help wake other people up. And that's the reason why we find ourselves with a cohort group, to try to help others to wake up. And thirdly, we came here because we volunteered to try to shift the consciousness of the species and the planet itself. And to do that, we have to realize that there's a very big difference between the ego and the soul. The agenda of the ego is survival and reproduction. All mammals, all creatures, that's their basic agenda, survival and reproduction, because they're identified with the ego. It's about being attracted to power and privilege and prestige. The agenda of the soul is very different. The agenda of the soul is unconditional love and unity consciousness. It's about service to others, about compassion for all sentient beings. I told you one time about a really powerful vision I had where I saw Gaia, this great soul, volunteer in front of God and say, send me, just like I said this morning, send me, I'll go. Send me to that third rock from the sun in that solar system, and I will breathe life until I finally throw up a life form which is conscious of its own divinity, and ipso facto, the divinity of all other life forms with whom we share the planet. And she's done that. And we're right on the brink of it. Now, Homo sapiens sapiens is auditioning for that role. We're auditioning for that role of being, you know, the species that recognizes its own divinity and the divinity of all other life forms, but we're badly fluffing our lines. And if we don't get it right, some other species eventually is going to be given that part. Factor number 8, I believe, is that violence in our thoughts, in our words, or in our actions never, ever, ever serves the evolutionary trajectory. And all of the great teachers, beginning about 800 BCE, there's a period in world history which is known as the axial age. It goes from about 800 BCE to about 200 BCE. And there was something extraordinary happening all over planet Earth during that period of time. This is the era that gave birth to all of the great teachers. You know, in the Far East, to Lao Tzu and Confucius. In India, to the Buddha and Mahavira. In Persia, to Zarathustra. You know, in Israel, to Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And in further west in Greece, to Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. There was something extraordinary happening in that period of time. And a little bit later, you know, comes Jesus. And much, much later, people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. And every one of these great teachers have told us again and again and again, violence never solves human problems. It never moves the system forward. The only thing that works is love and compassion and forgiveness. That is the only thing that will shift the paradigm. I've seen, as I've studied world history, and I've lived, had the privilege of living in several different continents, that every time a corrupt regime is overthrown violently, then the liberators just replace one corrupt, violent regime with another even more corrupt and more violent regime. And we see this again and again and again throughout human history. If you have to use violence to overthrow any corruption in any institution, you have to become a corrupt person and a violent person in the process. And when you find yourself in a position of power, you're going to use the same modality that got you into that position. So violence never ever works. Not in our thoughts, not in our words, and not in our actions. That would be factor number 8. Factor number 9, I believe, is there is darkness in our world. There is evil in our world. You want to be blind not to be able to see that. But it has many different origins. And I'm going to suggest 4 separate origins for this. The first one is the individual misuse of our free will. The greatest gift that Homo sapiens sapiens has, I believe, is the gift of free will, the ability to make choices. But most of us are stuck on a spectrum between service to self and service to others. We're stuck at the service to self end of the spectrum. And that feeds greed. And greed feeds fear. And fear feeds violence. So the first source of darkness and evil is the individual, every single one of us, being stuck at the service to self end of a spectrum, where greed and fear and then violence, become our meat and our drink. The second source, I believe, is that as an entire species, we have unacknowledged shadow material, which we then project. And this projected, unacknowledged dark energy constellates and aggregates like the great Pacific garbage patch between, the east coast of Asia and the west coast of the United States. This crud that lies in between. That is influencing, the ethos of life on planet Earth. That will be a second, source of evil. The third one, I believe, is what I'm going to call discombobulated souls who are stuck in Earth orbit. For some souls, as they're attempting to make the transition from physicality, through the veil to the other side, they're stuck with some kind of addiction to fear, or addiction to unforgiveness, or addiction to drugs of various kinds, and they hang out in the lower astral realms. And you can run into them at nighttime when you're dreaming or having out-of-body experiences. But they need physicality in order to indulge their addictions. And so they latch on energetically to humans who are still alive in order to generate that. And you see evidence of that even, when we're still on this side. You see evidence where, how can people watch 2 guys in a boxing ring beat the crap out of each other and start shouting, yeah, kill him, or have animals fight each other so we can take pleasure in one of them ravaging the other. How can we do that? We're feeding energetically and emotionally, on the pain of other beings right now. And there's a group who are disincarnate who continue to do that, and they continue to influence the course of events in our planet. That will be a third source. And the fourth source is, I believe, that in a universe of trillions of solar systems, there are trillions of civilizations, some of them much more advanced than we. But technological and intellectual advancement doesn't necessarily translate into moral rectitude or into compassionate behavior. And so I believe there are some technologically and intellectually advanced extraterrestrial civilizations who are using planet Earth, to create wars, and they feed energetically off the pain, that human beings are suffering. So you put these 4 pieces together, and that's the source of the darkness and the evil that we experience. And my 10th point is this. This darkness and this evil it always manages to get into a position of power. It has hijacked and it has corrupted all major human institutions. No matter how beautifully a group starts out, very quickly, a group will morph into an organization, which will morph into an institution, which will morph into an oligarchy, which will morph into, orthodoxy and persecution and inquisition and crusades. Happens again and again and again, where people who get to the top impress those beneath. And so I see in our world right now, I'm just going to list a bunch of areas that I believe have been corrupted, hijacked and corrupted. And if we need to do anything about our world, we need to educate ourselves in these areas. I'm going to list some of them. Agribusiness. When culture became business, and the great big, agribusiness people, the Monsantos of the world, came in and destroyed our crops with GMOs and insecticides, or have a huge effect on our health. That's an organization which is, has an awful lot of shadow material in it. Unfortunately, our education system has been hijacked, and we're not preparing kids for love and for life. We're preparing them to be cogs in a wheel, and to be consumers of various kinds. Our financial institutions, where less than 60 people own 80% of the world's resources. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Our justice system, which really seems to actively discriminate against some sectors of society. The mass media, which seems to deal almost entirely in fake news, whichever side of the divide you find yourself on. Materialistic science that tells us that if something can't be measured, it don't exist. That the idea that consciousness is actually an illusion created by the neuronal activity of a 3-pound piece of wetware that we carry between our ears. Medicine and the pharmaceutical industry, which is just popping pills at us in an effort to heal us. The idea that we must wait for a vaccine to deal with the coronavirus of our times, when it's obvious that the coronavirus and most of the illnesses we're experiencing are the result of the lifestyles we're living, and the fact that our planet itself is being poisoned. The air is being poisoned, the water is being poisoned, the land is being poisoned, our minds are being poisoned. And that's the reason why any virus will take hold. When it finds an opportunity to replicate in a system which is conducive to replication, it'll take advantage of that. So I would see, for instance, the military-industrial complex, where we spend trillions of dollars on a yearly basis as a world community, learning to kill people further and further away, faster and faster. Politics has been taken over, and religion itself, just like Sister Joan Chichester said in the second reading, that instead of moving us into mysticism, it's moving us into orthodox, dogmatic, fear-based understandings. So for me, these are the 10 factors that I see. And the reason I bring them up is this: you cannot understand the world in which you find yourself right now. And I don't care what issue really kind of exercises you right now. Are you mainly concerned about racism, or about the riots that are happening, the violence of these riots, or COVID-19? If you're focused on any one of these areas to the exclusion of the 10 factors I talked about, you're putting a Band-Aid on something that needs major surgery. We have to differentiate between transformation and change. They sound like they're synonyms. They're very different. Transformation is a slow, gentle, compassionate, evolutionary process. It's slow, it's gentle, it's compassionate, and it's an evolution. Change tends to be rapid and violent and a revengeful revolution. It's not evolution, it's revolution. And it always backfires. It always creates more violence. It's like a mafia vendetta. One family kind of wipes out members of another family, and 2 weeks later, there's a vendetta, and it goes on from generation to generation to generation. That's what change does, violent change, that's all it does. It replaces one corrupt, violent regime with a different corrupt, violent regime. Transformation then is about the slow, gradual, loving, forgiving, compassionate evolution of Homo sapiens sapiens into Homo spiritualis. I've said to you 20 years ago, without a bifurcation point, Homo sapiens sapiens is either going to become Homo sociopathicus or Homo spiritualis. And it's up to us to determine which it is. And that involves 2 pieces. It involves the individual commitment to transformation, to changing myself, to taking out violent thoughts, our violent speech, our violent actions. And it means, overhauling the systems. Good people in a bad system will get corrupted, or at least they'll be ineffective. A good system with bad people who are not themselves committed to their own transformation, they'll simply corrupt the new system. So the question I ask each one of us this morning, and you, When you volunteered for incarnation in this particular configuration of circumstances at this time in human history, what was your contract? So we can open it up now to question answer discussion.
Based off what you just brought up, I felt recently, the more spiritual I've gotten, is that I'm someone who I'm in business, but I feel like the West, there seems to be a lack of respect for feminine energy and nature. And I think that we need in the West, especially in the US, we need to have an equilibrium. So what I believe my mission is to have the balance between strong masculine and feminine energy and kind of incorporate that into my professional life. Because I don't think that I see myself becoming a monk or living off a full spiritual path, but I want to kind of incorporate my belief in God and spirituality into the mainstream, I guess, everyday life. And I think that's something that we need to do, like I said, especially in the West. I spent some time living in Asia, and I've seen that the overall pace of life, people are much more calm and seem to be at peace. And I think here people are driven by fear and anxiety. So that's what I try to do, is try to incorporate what I learned from living in Thailand in particular, and trying to bring that back into the US.
That's beautiful, Eric. Thanks a million. So I think you attended the recent retreat we did, and the topic of the retreat actually was spirituality beyond gender, Celtic wisdom, and the ascension process. So, we talked about that in a whole bunch of detail, and I'm absolutely on board with you. And so very, very definitely, there's been a total imbalance, particularly in Western society, with very much the yang virtues being privileged over the yin virtues. I would hope, that in our movement that we don't get stuck, just by oscillating between yin and yang, that we want women to take over the world, because if there's only feminine energy, it's going to be out of balance. It's been out of balance because it's been basically male energy up to now. We need to find a center point where, as I said, there are times when it is more appropriate in life to demonstrate yin qualities, and sometimes it's more appropriate to demonstrate yang qualities. And sometimes there are in a team, some people want to hold the yin position, others the yang, that's appropriate. And so it's a question of figuring out the timing of what kinds of virtues needs to come forward. But if you're like an artist who has an entire palette of colors available to him, so you're not going to just put red and your green daubs on the canvas. You can make any shades in between. You've got many, many colors to choose from. You've got thicknesses of brushes. You can do watercolors, or you can do canvas paints. So there's a whole bunch of ways of creating art. And the great artist is the person who's able to dip into all of these. And so I very definitely agree with you that there's been this massive overemphasis on yang, masculine energy, where nature and the feminine has been oppressed. We need to get beyond that, but we need to be careful that we're not just creating an angry reaction that just oscillates it to the other extreme, where a different group is in power and they're violent people, and they're oppressing the people who originally were their oppressors. And I think it becomes very important, the fact that you've lived in the East, in Thailand and in China, I think you said, it's so important for us to visit with other cultures and to learn from other cultures, even the opportunity of learning other languages. Because when you learn a language, you're not just learning different grunts for the same object in the physical world, you're putting on a different mindset, a different perspective on life. And so the ability to cross-fertilize cultures and languages becomes really important on our movement forward. And your third point I really love. We have to be able to translate that into our daily activities. We can't all, be monks, in the Himalayas living in caves. There are some people, and that's what they do for the planet. They literally impregnate the planet with the energy of mysticism and transformation. And there are people who are social workers who are in the trenches, and in between there's a whole spectrum. And most of us are involved in the world in some way or other. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where you have to translate our thinking and our mystical ideas into actual behavior and interaction. So you're right on the money, Eric. Thank you.
I just latched onto something that you said at the end there about, and I think it was something about being in a corrupt system we become corrupt.
Right. Yes.
But it made me wonder, about going into a corrupt system and having the mindset of love and compassion and gentleness and trying to bring that into the corrupt system. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking of my own feeling of when I go to work, my intent, and it's not always successful, but is to bring that kind of emotion to the job, and I'm probably in one of the most corrupt, systems that we have. So anyway, it just caught me when you said that.
Sure, it's a great point. And so here's the scoop. If you come to my house, Susan, and I offer you a drink of water, and the water, I have my own well, so I have pristine water that comes from the Sierras, a few hundred miles away from me. But I offer you a glass of water, but the glass is filthy. I haven't washed it in 3 or 4 years, and there's all kinds of mold and stuff going in it. And I scoop out, a glass of water and I offer it to you. Now, you're getting really good water, but you're getting it from a corrupted vessel. So you're going to take a whole bunch of bacteria aboard that wasn't part of the water, it was just part of the glass. And so it is very difficult to exist within a corrupt system and to hold on to one's, compassion and love, unless I'm not saying it can't be done. It can be done, obviously. That's what all the prophets do. All the prophets exist within systems that are themselves corrupted. But they hold on to this ideal. They hold on to this compassion. But it takes a very strong character to do that. The vast bulk of people who find themselves, in particular kinds of institutions, even if they went into it for the very best of motives, will get corrupted by the system. And I'll give you a case which is very close to the bone for me. As a young man, I volunteered to be a Catholic priest. I volunteered to spend my life to be celibate, to leave the opportunity of having a family, to go, to leave my own family and to go to a different continent. Only to discover, years and years and years later, that a small segment of the institution is extraordinarily corrupt, that there was pedophilia going on, that the history of the Catholic Church was a history of extraordinary corruption in the Vatican and in Rome, that the history of the Catholic Church was crusades and inquisitions against their own. So here am I, a really idealistic young man who's dedicated his life to doing this. But I know of lots of people who made this, who volunteered. I presume that every single Catholic priest, pedophile, joined the Catholic Church out of a sense of wanting to make a difference in the world. But somehow they got corrupted. There must have been obviously a predisposition, but there was something about the system, that somehow, allowed that to develop in some way. You're in the medical community. The medical community, people go into the medical community, doctors go in because they want to be healers in the world. And then they find themselves very often that they're literally pill pushers on behalf of big pharma. So you can take any kind of institution, and unless you're a really, really strong person, it is very difficult to maintain your integrity in the face of other people who've either given up or went into it for the wrong reasons. So hats off to those within the systems who are still maintaining their integrity and trying to change the systems from within. But the systems need to be radically reassessed in toto, using all of the factors I've outlined, because you can't just change one system while the others are corrupt, because they'll cross-contaminate. So it has to be a global effort to recognize all of these factors and involve all of these factors in moving into Homo spiritualis from Homo sapiens sapiens.
Hi.
Karen.
So my question has to do with a kind of the addictive nature of negative behavior.
Yes.
That it's almost as everything is at such a fever pitch now. It's as though people are equating that with being alive.
Yes.
That if you're not in that state, it's like you're not living, honestly. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. It's basically, it is biochemically wired into us hormonally and in the pheromones. You know very, very well, you're an animal lover. You got your Timmy, your dog, and you've got cats. So you know that animals sense fear, because when we're afraid, we literally, secrete pheromones that animals, over generations have been kind of are bred in nature to pick up on. So if you're I was out walking yesterday morning. I go walking every morning about 6:30. I came across a lion poop. Literally, there are wild lions in this area. Yeah, and I came across a scat, which was lion scat. Now, if I got really, really fearful, if he was still in the vicinity, I don't know where he was. He could have been just 100 yards away, I don't know, half a mile away, because I have a big territory. If I got really afraid at that stage and I started exuding pheromones of fear, that would attract that animal to me. So literally wired into us in our evolutionary trajectory from the time we were just single-celled amoeba became Homo sapiens sapiens. They're literally, fear is wired in through the pheromones and through our biochemistry, and we exude that and it becomes highly, highly addictive. Now, if you continue to kind of indulge yourself by looking at what's called allegedly the evening news, literally, you're going to begin all kinds of fear and all kinds of anxiety, and you're going to exude that into the ethos. And that ethos literally, it travels all over the planet. More quickly than I saw an article a few days ago about a huge big sandstorm in the Sahara. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
It came right across Africa, from the Sahara, right across the Atlantic into North America. Even 3,000 miles of sea couldn't stop it. Now, that's how anxiety and fear and anger and violence, even in our thoughts, that's how it gets carried on the airwaves and the kind of the oscillations, and the vibrations of the mind. And so the fact that you're sitting in front of a television set, taking all that, anxiety-provoking stuff aboard, you're feeding your own fear, and then you're exuding this energy and those vibrations, and it's carrying in all directions simultaneously. And so it becomes really, really important. I keep saying this to you guys. We need to be doing a news fast, because what you're hearing isn't actually news. It's the same old crap again and again and again. Jesus Christ said it 2,000 years ago, wars and rumors of wars. That's what alleged news is. And I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're at, you're getting fake news. And if that's what you're feeding yourself on, and you're getting exercised about and excited about and anxious about or depressed about or fearful about, you're just contributing to the ethos of anxiety on our planet. So stay away from that stuff. Go meditate instead. If you feel like watching the news, spend an hour meditating.
I always talk about my favorite subject matter when you talk about reincarnation and all of its implications. When I was doing my Hero's Journey talk a few times, I worked with the Hero's Journey graphic, and I realized there were 3 basic things about the journey of being a human. And the first thing is you got to really know, you got to live your life. You got to know who you are authentically. And that could take years to find the authentic self, because we have these roles and identifications and our shadows. So to really know who you are, to be yourself, your best self authentically. And that does include the shadow. And then the other thing about life, each day when you get up out of bed and you don't moan and groan too much, and you can walk and you can go to the bathroom, you have to appreciate everything you still can do. Different decades, you have different compensations or strengths, but just to appreciate, oh my God, I'm still alive. I'm still here. Just in that day, morning, and then throughout the day. And the other thing you've got to do with your life each day is do something with it, something meaningful. And to me, my little thing is just, just try to do one good deed a day. That's one of my little protocols. And you can just ask God or the universe, how may I be of service? So these are kind of the things that I try to do on my smaller level, which I know impacts the collective consciousness.
Right.
But enjoy my life, appreciate it, and do something with it.
Okay. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful 3-part plan, Ingrid. I love it. And you're absolutely right. I just make one comment on part number 2. And there's this realization that there's an old Buddhist saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Our lives don't change significantly. It's not like the externalities of our lives are suddenly radically different once you start waking up. Is that you begin perceiving stuff and responding to stuff very, very differently from how it was before you wake up. So it's a beautiful little 3-part plan. Thank you.
I have 2-part questions. First, is in regards to kind of human history here, incarnating planet Earth. Do you feel like there's a time or an era or some, kind of like clustered existences where humans got it right, and they attained this, maybe not as a global species, but particularly maybe intact indigenous cultures, or where there was an element of Homo spiritualis existing. And that kind of leads into the second question. Is that maybe how planet was before perhaps other forces and landed here and maybe did other things? And in that regard, as we, kind of second part, as we focus individually on really cleansing our hearts and the commitment to eradicating violence within our own speech and actions and thoughts, are there ways to protect ourselves specifically from those souls that are counteracting maybe our personal individual efforts? Since I feel like there can be a big battle even when you have your own intentions and desires to do work, needing to acknowledge those forces. Is there protection or ways to embolden ourselves to be more successful in our work in regards to facing those forces?
Kizzy, you're beginning to sound like me. You have two main points, but the second one has two parts to it.
That's what happens when I meet you at 10 years old.
So I'll try to respond to all three pieces. The first one, was there a time in human history when we got it right? Now, it depends on what you regard as human history. So if you look at some of the great models, like the Hindu models of what they call the Mahayugas, that there are these great, huge time periods of literally millions of years that go from a golden age to a silver age, to a bronze age, to an iron age, and that the quality of human love deteriorates over those, and then we go back into a golden age again. So it may be a cyclic process. So that's the first thing, that it may, I believe, and a lot of people believe, that we're in the iron age part of it, and we're trying to get ready for go back to the golden age. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing would be that I think individual mystical movements got it right for short periods of time. But unfortunately, mystical movements very often turn into religions, which turn into institutions, which turns into oligarchies, and you get crusades and inquisitions. So I believe, actually, just to take the tradition from which you came and from which I came, that the Jesus movement of 2,000 years ago, I think was an extraordinary mystical impulse that allowed people to be prepared to lay down their lives for a belief system which involved never doing violence to anybody, turning the other cheek, responding with love to insult, and that seemed to survive for almost 250 years unabated. So it was a long period in which it really, really worked. But they were a persecuted minority at that stage. And then in the year 312 AD, the emperor at the time, Constantine, Rome was under constant attack from the barbarians and the kind of the Vans and the Huns and the Vandals from Germany, the Celts from Germany, who sacked Rome on several occasions. So he moved the seat of his empire to Istanbul, which he then named in his own honor, Constantinople. And he gave the reins of government to the Christian movement that then took on all of the kind of titles of the emperor. So, for instance, the Pope is called Pontifex Maximus, Supreme Leader. That was an empirical title that the Pope then took on. And all of the jurisdictional understandings, like parish and diocese, they were all demographic, empirical constituencies. So the Christian Church took those over. And given the reins of power, it became really, really corrupt. When power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that period of extraordinary beauty lasted a period of time, and then it got demolished. So that would be, a Mahayuga, and then a small piece, one particular group. The same is true of all the other great mystical traditions, but I don't have time to get into that. So when did things begin to change on planet Earth? Was it sudden interference from extraterrestrial, intellectually advanced and technologically advanced societies that began to mess us around? Now, I'm going to go way out on the limb at this stage, because my big belief system is that life on planet Earth was actually seeded by extraterrestrials. I think planet Earth is the original Garden of Eden. And that societies which were literally millions of years ahead of us, in their journeys in space, found particular planets and they seeded them. And in actual fact, I believe there were several upgrades that initially they took a group of, what would you call the word for it, primates, upgraded them. So you had a kind of the chimps and the humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, whole groups, who were upgraded. And then a second upgrading that created Homo sapiens sapiens. And so that's been going on a regular basis. Now, some of these, I think, were really benevolent, loving entities. And like any society, when you think of, for instance, Europeans who went to Africa in the 16, 17, 1800s, there were colonialists who wanted to grab land. There were military people who wanted to conquer, the local population. There were missionaries who wanted to kind of introduce Christianity. There were anthropologists who wanted to study language and culture. There were kind of medical people who wanted to kind of deal with malaria and stuff. So there are totally different agendas coming from the very same continent, a little place called Europe. And the same thing I think is true, that those who visited us over the years and maybe who even started off the project came from very, very different backgrounds. So yes, some of them are interested in upgrading us spiritually, and some of them are interested in just feeding off our pain and anxiety. And the second part of your second question then was, how do we protect ourselves against those? A practice of meditation, a practice of prayer. The idea, and it may sound very, very kind of infantile to you, of even praying the prayer to the angel guardian. When I was a kid growing up in Ireland, we started every day and we ended every day by saying, Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this day or night, be at my side to light and guard, to rule and guide, amen. So literally entering the day in a state of conscious self-protection and connection to beings of light, and entering sleep and the astral travel in a state of being protected and connected to beings of light.
Thank you, Father Sean, for a wonderful talk, and especially about what really touched me was what I'm involved in every day, as you know, is the public education. And it turns out that studies have come out now, very solid studies, China and international, that the single one factor, whether somebody recovers from COVID or whether they go into ICU, whether they die, is the health of the body and the health of the air and the health of the water. And it turns out that the vitamin D3 level, which nobody's talking about, in my country, they're doing public campaigns to get D3 tests into people's homes. You can actually do, if you Google vitamin D3 online home test, you can test it yourself, and everybody says it should be not 20, which is what Kaiser doctors would say, 20 is fine. It should be 60 to 80. So my question is, with all this coming out, that the single most factor, is of course the lifestyle, the air, all the things that are going on, and how a person themselves, how inflamed they are, healthy they are. What can we do in our communities? Because the vaccine, the physicians I work with feel the vaccine so quickly is one of the most dangerous things that could happen to people. So I really acknowledge you for saying, it's like putting, again, a Band-Aid on somebody who's already inflamed or whatever. Let's just fix it really quickly. And I'm not against using vaccines, if they're life-saving, but this is a situation where they're reporting to be very dangerous. So what do you see could happen that the public could get the information about the D3 and the vaccines, when right now it's just being done in small groups like the groups I work with?
So I make three quick responses, Christine. The first one is that it becomes really, really important as we focus on individual issues that we have an entire framework so that we're working with each other. That people who are interested about, for instance, like agriculture, and people who are interested about the biome, and people who are interested in freedom of press, people who are interested in agriculture, whatever. That all this effort is coordinated. That's the first thing. That we can't isolate ourselves from other people who are dealing with other parts of the puzzle. The second piece I would say is that this is a very, very old, controversy. Way back when Louis Pasteur discovered, bacteria as the cause of illness. There was a very famous debate between himself and a very good friend of his called Claude Bernard, also, a medical person. Bernard saying that it's the terrain, it is not the bacteria. At any one stage, there are literally billions of bacteria in your system and billions of viruses in your system. In fact, when you actually study the human genome and the kind of the evolution of our species, it was viral attacks that actually evolved life on planet Earth. It was viruses at various stages of the last 4.5 billion years that shifted the environment in order to create more and more kinds of complex organisms to resist and to grow from it. So the viruses and the bacteria are not our enemies. They're only our enemies when they find themselves in terrain which is not capable of supporting the evolutionary agenda of them. And so Bernard was saying, it is the terrain that's important, not the particular bacteria that activate it. We have bacteria all the time. We wouldn't be alive. 80% of who we are is actually bacteria. We're basically taxi cabs for carrying these around. Now, having said that, then when you focus in on an issue like a vaccination, or, there's this big split years and years ago. I think it started with the kind of the witch trials, going back to the 1500s, and in our country in the 1800s, where wise women who were totally au fait with the herbs and the healing properties of nature were declared to be witches and alienated or sometimes killed. And then you got stuff like homeopathy and herbal medicine being outlawed, and a group taking over like the AMA and dictating that there's only one form of response to illness and taking over that. And so you ally that to the fact that there is no permission to advocate for another perspective in this area or in many other areas. I came across a frightening study a few days ago. In the last 5 years, 102 physicians, researchers who had alternative, treatments for a whole range of illnesses were, quote unquote, suicided under extraordinary circumstances. One guy shot himself in the forehead and then walked 100 yards and threw himself into a river. So 102 in the last 5 years. That there's a concerted effort, that there's only one narrative and that we're shutting down any alternative possibilities. Now, I'm not saying this one is better than that one. I'm saying is we need to look at the research, real research, without it being deplatformed. And what I'm saying in this COVID-19 situation is a lot of possibilities are actually being shut down by people who have a vested interest in the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm not going to name names, but you know who I'm talking about. So let's leave it at that, guys, and let's go back to the Eucharist. Thanks a million for your patience.